program here, and we really appreciate you being with us today and all the rehearsal connections we've done with you, and we look forward to your presentation today. For everybody in the room and in the virtual community, so you know it, we have a small group here on site at Fort Eustis, which includes a group of our foreign liaison officers that work here at Training and Doctrine Command. We have a virtual community. We're running a communication or a chat room that has over 100 individuals in it, and we're streaming and we're tweeting the event. So you'll get some good questions after your presentation, so it should be great. For everyone, Dr. Lipke is Assistant Branch Chief for the German Armed Forces Bundeswehr, Office for Defense Planning. Dr. Lipke has the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the German Army Reserves. He is a political scientist and works in the future analysis team there. So this is his day job, what he's talking to us about, and we look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the German perspective of the future security environment. Although I have to say, I have to stress out that the thoughts and statements today are based on my professional view and do not necessarily reflect any official views. So please bear with me that I'm just a single person here. Just to give you a very rough and short idea where I'm working at, as just mentioned, I'm a member of the Planungsamt der Bundeswehr, or Bundeswehr Office for Defense Planning, with its main seat located in Berlin. We are a subsidiary department of the Ministry of Defense under direction of the Planning Division, and the main task of the whole house is the work on the development of requirements for procurement. One of the first steps of the whole procurement process, you all know it, is to get an idea of what is needed. And basically it means to look into the future and analyze it for trends in technology, security policy, military developments, whatever. And this is where I'm exactly working. I'm in the future analysis branch. We give, as highlighted on the slide, guidelines to the future orientation of the Bundeswehr. Compared with other governmental future analysis organizations, my impression is we are relatively big, with a staff of 10 people, me being the political scientist. Below left, you can see me here. We do interdisciplinary work following the so-called STEEP approach. You can see it here, supplemented by military and cyber as fields of research. Our strength is the combination of our different academic backgrounds and knowledge networks. As future analysis branch, we don't work on forecasts, which is important to stress out. We don't do forecast, we develop scenarios and analyze these. As an example, you can see the core of our Strategic Foresight 2040 document, released in 2017. We developed 6 different future security environment scenarios for the world of 2040, focusing on the strategic level. In these scenarios, you can see them here, we describe the whole world in different settings, focusing on aspects like society, economy, global political situation, and foreign policy. But the force or capability planning at this level is way too high for the force and for the Bundeswehr, and offers only minimal input for military planning. Therefore, we have been working on a translation of this document, and this translation we have called our German Future Operating Environment, or FOE. Our Future Operating Environment, as we call it, has been released just a couple of weeks ago, actually. And unfortunately for this audience today, I can neither show you the results or quote from the FOE, as it is classified for military eyes only. But we are currently preparing an English version so that at least our military allied partners can read it. And in case you're interested, please approach me or the German military representatives here in the conference. I already saw someone sitting in the front row with a German flag on his shoulder. So at least this one is someone who could help you in this point. So, but this is not the end of my presentation, of course. I'm now coming to the points you've brought up. As you may know, we Germans welcome any sort of rules, regulations, and especially orders, and therefore I was quite happy to be given optional framing questions for the presentation. And these are the ones I have used for answering the points that you have been brought up. and for your delight orientation here. Disruptive technology, and which one is the most concerning for my country? Well, to be honest, I don't claim to be speaking for all my fellow Germans, but the rise of machines, as I have called it, is certainly something we need to be aware of. It is even a challenge that is not limited to the military view, since these technologies will impact on all fields of human life. The main problem I see here is, will we still understand what's going on? And while the analysis of big data is something that may be still under human control, or at least some sort of human control, artificial intelligence certainly isn't, because that's the way of artificial intelligence. And if we have an AI system, how do we know that these decisions of the systems are right? How do we know that these decisions are good? We can certainly argue that even today, many human decisions can't be understood or even comprehended. So my point is that we will most likely accept and trust those decisions of an AI that look human, and will question those decisions that do not. Which would mean that with future AI, we probably will wait some good answers to questions we are still looking an answer for, and that those answers that are not looking good in our eyes probably are the good answers to questions we need to answer. When looking at imminent security risks, I cannot disguise my profession as a political scientist. The biggest risk I see here at the moment is the risk that most likely to rise during the next years is the weakening of democratic political systems and societies. The problem in my opinion is twofold. On the one hand, we have a decline in social cohesion and political fragmentation in our Western nations. Think of Brexit, the divided states of America, and the rise of populist movements, especially in Western Europe. The other problem is that authoritarian governments and systems are on the rise. States like China are economically strong and offer a successful alternative to the democratic political system. To the outside, they appear determined, cohesive, and resourceful. And even if that doesn't work, they have the means and the will to exercise total control. I think most of you have heard of the social scoring system. If we, the West, don't solve our weaknesses and bring new life into our liberal ideas and spirit, we will have to face a tough future. For future joint operations with our allies, I see two challenges we need to overcome. More precisely, these are constant a process of adjustment, since we will never reach an endpoint here. We need jointness in policy and technology. As I pointed out in the slide before, a declining cohesion is weakening our Western societies. Same applies for our alliances, but on a higher level. We Europeans still struggle to speak with one voice, especially in foreign and security policy. If we would combine our efforts, we could be a much stronger international player. But we do lack cohesion, respectively with the will to sacrifice national ambitions for the sake of the European Union. On the technical side, we will have the challenge of operating various systems of different generations and technological standards. Linking these all together in battlefield, especially with ultra-modern systems like the F-35 or the planned future combat air system, will probably result in friction loss that needs to be compensated during the whole thing. Technological innovations are more or less the same in all Western forces, I'd say. The big three I have shown here from my point of view. Cyber warfare is something that's definitely hard to grab for the military. It's not big, it's not massive, it doesn't look like a tank. You can't touch it, but it will surely make an impact. Also, cyber warfare is not necessarily limited to the field of the military. This topic needs a whole of government approach. Automation and artificial intelligence, I already mentioned this field. The current discussion in Germany concerning lethal autonomous weapon systems is quite cautious. The main goal is to keep the development under tight control, preferably banning these kind of weapon systems. There are strict regulations in Germany regarding the military development and the use of these systems. So we are balancing on the edge a little bit, trying to stay as far in front as possible, but at the same time working on a global ban. And then there are the classical innovations regarding new weapon systems, which tend to become more and more expensive, so that we face the decision, do we buy one expensive system of high quality or several cheap ones with less quality? These questions didn't have been answered yet, but we are working on a daily business on this. My initial response to the question of exploiting our nation's talent was, well, this is mostly not our business, at least from the military point of view, and we struggle on those parts where it is. Recruiting is always a hard thing. Actually, many of this is outside the responsibility of the armed forces, but we do have a couple of themes that fit in here. Especially in the fields of recruiting and training, there have been put in some efforts to fill the ranks. With the suspension of the draft in the German armed forces, with the suspension of the draft, the German armed forces suddenly had to really recruit young men and women. New concepts for like YouTube series and campaigns are used now, and there's been a recently developed concept for using the reserves more in the daily business of the forces and improve their qualification. Academic training has been the focus for much longer, with the introduction of the Bundeswehr universities in the early 1970s. Each staff officer is required to obtain at least a bachelor degree during his military career. However, the knowledge that has been collected in the military personnel of the forces could still be better exploited and much more efficiently, so my opinion. Still, only few officers get to work in a field where they have gained academic knowledge in, so much is wasted. Please note that I crossed out technology in the headline. I admit that my background as political scientist once again came into play here. I think that we Germans are unique in our threat assessment. There's a gap between the security professionals who do see our vulnerability, especially against hybrid warfare, and the rest of society. There's a common attitude in German society that there is no threat at all for us, at least from a military point of view. This lacking consensus does not only leave us unable to act politically in peacetime, and probably even in times of war, it makes us a perfect target for hybrid warfare. One current opponent is clearly using this as a strategy, interfering on a deniable level to act below the military threshold, as we have seen in Crimea 2014, and to support this policy, also having the threat of nuclear escalation with short-range weapons as a backup. I see a sort of variation of the famous Teddy Roosevelt quote, act undercover but carry a big stick. Here you can see our Bundeswehr in the era of machine speed warfare. Yes, sorry, this joke was just too obvious in regard to big organizations like the military, and I really like this turtle. But to give you some more reason to my military turtle on the slide before, in most areas we are not fast enough to deal with the challenge of machine speed warfare. The organizational structures are too slow and involve too many decision makers who often don't decide but simply administer the whole thing. Bureaucracy is becoming a nuisance, often seen as a thing that just feeds itself without any real use for the forces or their concerns. Another thing that is very interesting and not good is the continuous change of station of staff officer, which is leading to a brain drain. People that just have become fully proficient in their job are transitioned to another post, with the previous job taken over by someone completely new to the task. And our procurement processes are too long, which is especially harmful when it comes to any kind sort of IT projects or projects which have IT affiliation or IT components in it. Software is long outdated when it's finally procured and put into service. But I think this is something that we all have made our experiences with. There are some whole-of-government approaches to combat weaponized information, but they are still sparse and on a low level in Germany, I think. Studies have been carried out. The German MOD serves as a technological watchdog. There are some projects that aim to improve media information competence, especially for young people. But overall, there's no real coordinated effort. It's probably still a part of the German threat assessment, which is, as I just mentioned, not that interested in this kind of thing. I see shortcomings, especially on the side of social awareness for this challenge, since this would be the crucial point of attack for any future opponent against us. The subject of force training and preparation is not really my expertise, I have to say, but I can comment on a more generic view. With the events of 2014 in Eastern Europe and then following on, the focus of the European part of NATO shifted towards a more conventional conflict again. In the years before crisis management, operations have been the center of nearly all strategic and operational thinking. And some even mentioned that we are now in the Cold War 2.0, which in my opinion is not a good classification because it's not the same as the Cold War 1.0. But with the returning rise of collective defense, there have been improvements in the trainings and maneuvers, both on multinational and national level. A really important task is the effort to equip the armed forces according to their task. In the past, there has been a serious lack of material, a couple of years ago, highlighted by the infamous broomstick that had been used to mock as a machine gun on an infantry fighting vehicle in Germany during a maneuver, which immediately made the headlines in the news. Also, we need to upgrade our numbers on major weapon systems. The number of German Kampfpanzer, main battle tanks, fell from about 4,000 at the end of Cold War to roughly 250 today, and is supposed to rise to a breathtaking 320 in the next years. I don't think the following points are missing in your operational environment because you asked what is missing in the current description. But I'd like to underline the importance from our view. We need more than just military power in the future. We need to have a common understanding and a joint effect to defend the idea of the West. Our Western community of value is under pressure by authoritarian thoughts and regimes. They threaten our political and social cohesion from the outside and from the inside. We need to understand the influence of social media and information and the risk this influence poses when it's manipulated. On a positive note, and as an example, I do see the wide distribution of mobile phones and global connections. Would you have thought that in a state like Iran, with a relatively tight control of this population, a state-sponsored lie would have been discovered within only a few hours? A short time after the downing of the Ukrainian airliner, multiple videos showed up in the World Wide Web that proved that indeed missiles were fired at this aircraft. And this is something where we can see that modern technology in the hands of simple people will make a difference. So the truth still asserts itself. And that's my optimistic view. And I thank you for the attention.
Sir, thank you. That was a great presentation, and we have questions for you. Can you hear me? And
I can hear you. Can you see me as you wish me to see? I can hear you. Can you see me as you wish me to see?
I see, you're a small circle on the top of your slides right now.
Yeah. Better now?
Yes,
perfect.
I see.
Oh,
perfect. So you know I have to ask this question because you are German and the U.S. Army is in love with Clausewitz. So you've just described a future, the rise of machines, speed, all these things. Do you see this as just a changing in the character of warfare or a potential in the change of the nature of warfare as Clausewitz described it?
The easy answer would be time will tell, which is probably not very sufficient for your question. I'm really not sure. I think most parts of it will just change the way we have seen war. There have always been some kind of revolution in military affairs, which sometimes don't have been that revolution at all, just an evolution. But I think the introduction of artificial intelligence, especially in the way of decision making, not necessarily in the way of having systems operating on their own, but in the way these systems decide, and more important, they decide in the strategic term, will probably make a huge impact on future conflicts. I'm fearing that one day we are sitting somewhere in the headquarters, pressing the necessary buttons to make the AI do the decisions, and the AI comes up with some kind of decision which we don't understand. And then we have three options. Because we don't understand it, we say, okay, we don't follow this, we make it as we always did, we make a human decision here. Or we make a decision by the AI, and for some reason, this AI decision, because we got to understand is so good that it completely ends the conflict and we win. Or the AI was wrong. Or the AI was compromised and it's wrong because someone else has manipulated it. So this is something we will take very seriously, how we will work in the future, and what kind of decision making we will give away, or we have to give away, because otherwise some opponent will always be faster and better in his decisions than we are with our human decisions.
Friction of dealing with a decision support tool than maybe the fog and friction of where the enemy is, or vice versa. So, I thought that was a very interesting response. You mentioned the tension on weapon systems. You talked about high quality, high cost systems versus or against the idea of potentially the many or quantity and low cost. But I wonder if that question itself is useful without talking about the concept of how they would be used. So the Chinese are actually developing this idea of intelligentization of warfare. It's this new theory of warfare they're thinking through as they're thinking about what warfare looks like with these systems. So the concept the German army is thinking about in fighting in the future is, is that informed by this idea of quality versus quantity, or is it a mix?
In ideal ways, it hopefully will be a mix, because we will still have the necessity to have high quality systems, which are probably then very, very important, very, very expensive, that are able to get through in the situation. While in other situations, we just need a pure mass. As my boss once said, quantity is a quality of its own. In this case, you will probably need something that is cheap. You can put in masses on it, and if you lose half of it, it doesn't cost you much, both on spending as well as on military lives, because putting a force in and losing half of the soldiers there is probably not an option for German armed forces and for other forces neither. So we probably have to get a good mix of both kind of systems, having both expensive and high quality, and cheap and low quality. And the thing is, we will have to work on is what kind of mixture we will have. Is it a 10:9, 10:1 ratio, or is it a 50:50 ratio, or is it a 1:10 ratio? And this is something we still have to determine. And looking at Chinese is very interesting, because on the one hand, they're a big mass army, but they're improving on the quality very much. And it is very interesting to see if they are just getting the same way, like we going more to the quality side of the balance, or still keep their quantity as main power.
Dr. Lipke, we have two questions from the online community. One, you've addressed information operations in the near future, but how do you see these kind of operations being promulgated deeper into the operational environment? And what is the plan for countering advanced media manipulation, deepfakes, audio, video, so on? Thank you.
I hope I can answer this question, because I have actually not that much insight in how we are going to address this in case of war and conflict. We do have new force or new service, the cyber information room service, cyber information space, and these are probably the guys who will deal with this kind of threat, or this kind of challenge. However, they are still quite limited as far as I understand. For example, there are no hackbacks allowed. They're more on the defensive role. And as I fully understand it, there's a real cultural problem, because they're trying to fight within certain borders, even geographical borders, which are not given in the cyber information space. So what kind of tactics, strategies in this field are going to be employed is beyond my knowledge, and I'm sorry I can't give any more answer to this. I have to find out myself, and if I find out, it's not open for an open audience, I think.
Dr. Lipke, we have a question from Twitter. The question is, given innovations in cyber, robotics, and AI, which are helpful, how do we compete and win against an enemy that does not have the same ethical standards for their employment?
We simply don't. No, actually, if we are a little bit torn here in the sides. On the one hand, we have ethical standards, which are part of a Western system, Western society, and which are high and behold, and of big value for us. Unfortunately, this makes us weak on the battlefield. And we are always fighting with one hand tied behind the back in this case. And I have no idea how we are going to win against an opponent who just is technologically on the same level as we are, but has no ethical constraints here. This is something I have no idea how we were going to win this. Sorry, no idea. I'm looking for you guys to have some kind of answer to this in the future.
Yeah, so I don't think anybody has an answer, but I would say that I would really encourage our armies to figure out a way to simulate this idea of where we gave authorities and capabilities to weapon systems and asymmetrical authorities and capabilities of weapon systems, and see truly what is the disadvantage, and if there and to explore if there's an advantage to mitigate that disadvantage, or either turn into an opportunity on a future battlefield. So this is something that's come up in conferences before, and actually came up in the last presentation as well with the officer from the Netherlands, as far as a unifying. And for the MadSci team, you got to be capturing this. We've captured before, is this idea of asymmetry of ethics. And this is something that's a commonality that exists, that we know it is a problem. This is the ultimate pink flamingo. It's not a black swan, it's a pink flamingo. We know it's there, but we can't define what the real impact is, because it requires potentially some simulation work that we could get to understand really what the gap is. So I know you couldn't answer it, but your answer that you gave was helpful.
Yeah, and I also think this is something we need to red team.
Yeah, and I also think
the tactic of red teaming these kind of events is something that would be the first step to get an idea what can happen in this field. And this is something where we need creative minds who are thinking beyond the border and even beyond ethical constraints, just for the red team's sake, saying, I'm a really bad guy today. I'm not really bad. I'm the baddest guy at all. And I really make things hard and complicated and asymmetric, as you just mentioned. And this is something we need to train and simulate in the next years on a more and broad level than we do at the moment, which is, my impression is, we do not enough. Not enough.
So, sir, we've heard from an officer from their French Army staff. We've heard from an officer from the Netherlands, and now you who serve on your German staff. There are some commonalities. One commonality that was kind of there is the idea of interoperability. The officer from the Netherlands really described the really integrated units down to the company level with the German Army. So the German and the Netherlands Army, their interoperability is at the lowest level. The French officer described interoperability more in a classical sense, which is make sure we had radios and targeting systems and all those things that allowed us to communicate across organizational boundaries. As far as interoperability, and we just kind of talked about speed and potentially different ethics as far as what AI is considered okay. The Netherlands are really concerned about black box AI. You have to understand the algorithms before you could integrate it into a future military formation. Where do you think interoperability sits in this? And then we really talked about that as a key aspect of the role of between an EU army, a NATO army, and then operating even just as a coalition. So how do you feel interoperability fits in there as far as a key aspect of the OE and the rapid change in technology?
Interoperability has always been some kind of mantra that has been carried in Europe, especially in the national nations. And very often I had the feeling it's used as a symbol or as an instrument to say someone else is going to do it. We don't need this because someone else is going to do it. And this is something which is not as it's usually has been thought of. The idea is to work together to strengthen the whole effort and not to put platform or capability A to one state and capability B to the other state. The idea is that both states combine them and make stronger, and not that they are divided into different parts here. So what on an operational level, I've heard that there are certain restraints that you can't work interoperability on a certain level below, because starting by language problems, not everyone speaks English perfectly, and so you have to start integrating it. And then we come into all fields of still European economic problems or views. One state wants to keep this kind of system because he produces it on its own. He doesn't want to buy the system by his neighbor state because he would then lose its own industrial base. We could be much better in this case, and I see a slow integration on all sorts of things, but it's slowly working only. And to be honest, if you look at it in a more philosophical way, what has been left of the European individual nation states, which is still in the national capability and national resources, which is basically the security policy and the military. Economics has been so much intertwined. Social life and living is so much intertwined that you are feeling them yourself as a European, not as a French or not as a German anymore. The only field where you can really still be a strong nation is the military and the foreign policy. And to give this up to a strong Europe is something that is far away from my opinion. It's going to happen one time, hopefully, because we have to, otherwise we won't stand a chance as Europe in this world of today and tomorrow, but it's working slower than is usually necessary.
Another commonality between your presentation and the one from the officer from the Netherlands, and I know that it is a communication point the Canadian officer is going to talk about, it'll be something the American officer talks about, is this idea. The Netherlands officer called it truth. You called it protect your narrative on the cartoon. This is a problem at the strategic level, so I'm not asking you, how to deal with the strategic part of this, but at the operational and tactical piece, you can see how it's going to be a key component of even fighting regional competitors as far as going straight to the will of the people and how they feel about the conflicts our armies are involved in. So this idea of truth or narrative, the Netherlands, they're actually looking at a formation in the future that could actually help with that as a mixture of cyber, some information operations capability, things like that. Has the German army, do you know if there's some development of doctrine or organizational changes related to understanding this aspect of a future fight?
I'm not sure if there is some kind of change. We do have a Center for Operational Communications, which is responsible for a kind of newspaper in the area of operations. They're informing the local population. They are developing concepts for information warfare even. But the problem is it's the line that's to cross to come to something like that sounds like propaganda is very thin. And as soon as you have something that sounds like propaganda or is called as propaganda, not only the narrative in the area has been spoiled, but the narrative in the German society is spoiled immediately. So this is a very, very concerning thing, or not concerning thing, but it's something that is really, really hard to get and hard to grab where you put your narrative, how do you keep it as a narrative, and how do you distinguish it from propaganda. And But you're fully right. This is something we need to be aware of and we need to work on for the future operations, because we can be as good as we want on the military field. If we don't win the narrative or spoil the narrative, we have lost.
Dr. Lipke, another question from online. What about the interoperability of algorithms, specifically for decision-making and the categorization of learning systems? In other words, if two automated systems from allied forces meet in the field, how do we ensure that they reach similar conclusion that one is different but still not a threat? Humans do that quite naturally by a common biological heritage to analyze each other. Machines, as of yet, cannot do so.
That's a question for my technology colleague, who is more proficient in this kind of field, or cyber colleague, which we don't have yet. So I can't answer this. We need some kind of identification, friend or foe, or some kind of rules of engagement implemented into these systems. But how this technological will work, I have no idea. But you're completely right. This is something you need to implement in the systems. On the other hand, it's, I would say, daily business for military forces. How do you recognize your friend? How do you recognize your foe? This is something that the armies and forces have done for thousands of years.
Good point, sir, is that, we've done that, so what does that look like in machine-to-machine collaboration, even if there are humans on the other side that are using these tool sets? So I think that's a key takeaway, is and what that looks like. And then also, that question's a good one, because when we talk about interoperability, at least in my mind, I immediately go to, you talked at language, that was a very good one, but there's also just radios and fire support systems and things like that. As you add a layer of AI, even narrow artificial intelligence onto the battlefield, that's a whole nother layer of interoperability you're talking about, and actually maybe even a more complex one because of the different rules and policies that exist across the countries within your coalition. So that is a very good point, one that we'll follow up with our U.S. Army AI Task Force and with the Joint AI Center as they're thinking through these problems, because they're thinking very service joint. Well, my question to them is going to be, okay, who's thinking coalition? So we'll follow on those. It's a great follow-on question from your presentation. For a last question for you, sir, and you've probably given some of these, but I just want to give it a chance. We talk about conflict drivers in some of our work. What do you think are two of the three of the potential conflict drivers? It might be one of them we're missing. We're very focused on technology here. There are other ones that are out there, but what's your sense as a political scientist on the conflict drivers that we need to be aware of in this operational environment out to the future?
Yeah, of course. I think my Dutch colleague already mentioned climate. This is something that drive, especially in the regions far from Europe, that will drive conflict. On the other hand, migration is a very important and very strong topic here, because migration can be used, in my opinion, also as a kind of weapon. As soon as you are able to get a region or people in a region to migrate, they'll probably go to Europe. And this is something that is of a certain concern for our nations here in Europe, because this is something that will not destabilize, but pose a challenge for the political system, for societies. And this is something that an opponent who is reckless enough to produce this kind of migration in his area of interest or area of operations will probably employ. So this is something we need to change, need to take that all these kinds of battlefields that we feel are far away from a geographic point are much closer, and we will get the impacts from these battlefields coming in to our personal homes or cities at home by people who are seeking refuge because their own homes have been destroyed in a faraway battlefield by someone who deliberately did so.
Thank you. And the mass migration, that's a great question, because it might be wrong, but one of the things we think about is in NATO, is there's a good portion of the NATO countries that their primary thing they're thinking about is threat from Russia. And there's a good portion of the NATO countries that mass migration and climate change are first and foremost in their minds. And I know we can focus on more than one thing at a time, but is that different view of the future, does it have any implications on military focus within the member countries? And we're going to ask the NATO panel that later. It'll be a question we ask them as they're looking at NATO 2040. So that's a great help for us with that discussion. And from a U.S. perspective, forced mass migration should not be something that we don't understand, because Fidel Castro tried to use that against us with the famous boat lift where he forced people out of Cuba into the U.S. Back in the 80s, as he tried to weaponize that. That in the long run, I think we won, but that was something he attempted. So we understand that threat for sure. So, sir, we appreciate your time with us today. We hope that, and we know it's getting late there in Germany, but we hope you have a chance to listen in to some more of the conversation. And we're glad we connected with you. I hope that you have the opportunity to go on to our MadSci lab and subscribe. And feel free to write. We have a survey ongoing, the Global OE survey. I hope you've seen that, but the link is on the MadSci lab. We would love for you to share it with your office mates, the technology officer and the other teammates that you have. Have them fill out and give you an opportunity to expound on some of what their opinions are about the future as we do a follow-on from this piece. So if that's it, sir, we appreciate your time. We are proclaiming you an Army mad scientist. You will be getting the documentation of that presently, along with what, yes, it's awesome. And then what we call, you see my hair. See, I went all in, just like that. That's what I did. I retired from the military and said, I'm a mad scientist, I'm going crazy. So we appreciate that, and we'll send you what we call swag, which are things that you can hang around the office at home and have people ask, what is going on with this? And you are a U.S. Army mad scientist now. So that's it, sir. Have a great rest of your day. And for the people